Welcome to Phillip Mastermind. My name is Kim. Today we are honored to have Mr. Stephen Bang, the head of ESG strategy, Phillip Capital Management Limited, to share his thoughts on ESG. Allow me to introduce the biodata of Mr. Stephen Bang. He spearheads sustainable investing strategy for Phillip Capital Management. He leads corporate sustainability and the development and deployment of the ESG integrated investment framework for growth. He is responsible for ESG research, portfolio and risk management processes that affirm Phillip Capital's stewardship commitments and advance positive planetary outcomes. Concurrently, he is a board member of the National Parks Board Singapore, the lead agency for biodiversity conservation under the Ministry of National Development. He is also chair of Friends of the Marine Park Community, a public-private people partnership that promotes the sustainable use and stewardship of Singapore's natural blue spaces and supports ocean-dependent communities, and vice chair of the CFADI, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, Singapore Working Group. Let's start with the first question, Mr. Stephen. We all know that ESG has garnered a lot of attention from the people, and from the Malaysia perspective, we may have gained insights into Malaysia's ESG process and progress through various sources such as news, social media, and videos. However, gaining insights into ESG developments on a global scale, including in Singapore, is equally valuable to our audience, I suppose. Stephen, could you provide an overview of global ESG trends and developments, including notable initiatives from Singapore? Over to you.
Thanks, Kim. Thanks for having me here. And it's a great introduction because ESG and sustainability isn't a measure of only one country's efforts. Obviously, we do have local challenges in mind. But what we've done from the Phillip Global Sustainability Office point of view is to categorically make sure that we understand what we're measuring in the context of global issues and the megatrends, one of which is climate change, where we put together a statement to clarify our position on things. And that statement includes the fact that we recognize our responsibilities, our role as Phillip Capital as a group, and therefore all the companies within it, to be participants of the green transition. And having said that, then we make sure that we adopt the definition that is clear as well under UNEP, for example. When we talk about the green economy and the green transition, we are talking about a low carbon transition, one that is circular, going towards a circular economy, but also in a nature positive way, right, with minimal net losses, also with social justice in mind. Now, this equitable access means that a lot of times when we look at different countries and its development stages, we find that a lot of the problems lie in socioeconomic root causes. And so when it comes to looking at sustainability as a whole, we use ESG as a form of measurement. And really, that's what it is. And we can't confuse the two, even though they're interrelated between ESG and sustainability. ESG is a form of measurement, and it provides a framework for us to measure and monitor our investments and the entities within our investments there. So some of the mega trends that we've been looking at and we continue to look at as the world moves ahead with all the things that's happening, right? We've got a couple of wars happening in the last few years. We have the world coming out of a pandemic, but coming straight into mpox and so on. That's going to continue. But how do we rationalize and separate the noise of short-term disruptions from longer-term issues? And these are longer-term planetary issues that we must address, and we can and should address as a financial institution, and in the influence that we do have over companies big and small. So in what I introduced earlier, in the megatrends that we do continue to monitor because of the very fact that it has an impact on the global economy and that influence on the green transition, are definitely climate change and how this effort, right, coming together in the form of a compact called the Paris Agreement, and the nationally determined contributions of each country that committed to it, how that impacts not just the global economy, its supply chains, but also then the national efforts of those commitments on businesses that are being supported by these governments. So climate change is definitely one of them. A rapid urbanization, right? 2/3 of us will live in cities if we're not living there already by 2050. And this exasperates the problem, right? Because most of the energy and heat generated are from cities, and we'll need more land, more food, more homes, right? And we may face shortage of materials needed for food, for basic sustenance, right? Agriculture and so on, as well as clean energy. So these are two main trends. We look at a few. Couple of things I'll leave you with, and then I'll move on to some things that we are contributing towards in Singapore, right? The other thing is demographics, right? People are living longer, yeah. And the number of people, I think, aged 65 or older is set to double by 2050 as well, and it's going to hit 1.6 billion. How is this global population then going to impact and survive within the challenges that we already have? The global populations are definitely estimated to keep rising for another 50 years, probably, right? To over 10 billion. So is that an issue that we must look at? And those are the part of the socio-economic root causes that I was talking about. When we talk about environment, we aren't talking about managing the weather or the sea state. We are talking about what we can do and influence through our own man-made efforts, right? So I guess the other thing that we're watching is a rebalancing of global wealth and power. 7 out of the 10 biggest economies by 2030 will be likely from current emerging markets. I mean, China, India, we look at those markets very carefully and very closely. Brazil, yeah, we get a lot of natural resources from these three countries alone. The economic structure and geography of these nations make them also most exposed to the changing climate and its impacts. So whether it's rising seas for the low-lying areas in the islandic nations, heat waves in the tropics, or desertification as well. So these are some things on our watch list on a weekly basis. Coming to your question on Singapore, I mean, every country would have their efforts, Malaysia included. But what stands out for us and how we want to contribute, because as we look at our research processes later, we are trying to make sure that as we contribute to the green economy, and this is global, how are we then contributing at the local level, right? And Singapore has the Green Plan 2030, the Singapore Green Plan 2030, from which it's built on 5 pillars. The first one being nature related, and that's a city in nature. You obviously in Malaysia, you're close to us, so you know that we've always called ourselves a city in a garden or a garden city. Now we're trying to do rewilding, we're trying to do restorations, we're trying to do double up efforts on conservation and preservation of our natural areas because it is capital to us. So that's part of the effort. Obviously, and this is a whole of nation effort. There's energy reset. So the decarbonization efforts locally is going to have a very, very big impact on our businesses and our investments because it will affect industry by industry on its own transition pathway. Shipping, for example. So maritime decarbonization is a big thing. The government and all the industries or businesses within its influence are set to decarbonize by 2045. The private sector is also moving in that direction as well. Yeah. On the financial side, I guess the central bank and a lot of central banks are moving towards greening the financial system. So how then are governments also coming in the public sector and the private sector partnering up to make sure that it's an effort to a mutual collective effort to make reporting and sustainability disclosures as seamless as possible, as harmonized as possible in order for us to be able to measure real world impact. I'll stop there and go back to you.
All right, thank you, Stefan, for your very comprehensive explanation on the ESG trends happening around the world as well as in Singapore. We hear you on the net zero targets in order to address challenges like climate change, some social security issues and whatnot, and that requires partnership from the public sector as well as from the private sector. So moving on to the second question, from an investment standpoint, given your experience as a head of ESG strategy at Phillip Capital Management Limited, how can ESG factors be effectively integrated into the investment decision-making process, and how could these benefit investors?
That's a great question. I'm looking forward very much to working with the Malaysia office on this. It's not easy, let me tell you that first and foremost. ESG integration into all our processes, especially the investment process, is must be intentional with development of the processes that help establish this sustainable investing framework that we're after. It stems from three things. Yeah, the firm must take a position, like what I mentioned when we first started this chat. It must take a position on what its role is in this whole ecosystem first, but in this whole cause of addressing these planetary issues that impact our economy and our businesses. Number two is philosophy. We must also come into sustainable investing with the right approach. And we have in Asia, we have this advantage of starting relatively late to see where the potholes are in the developed countries and in countries that started, sustainable investing earlier. Approaching it from an inclusionary standpoint is what is really needed, because first and foremost, if our outcome, right, our objective of sustainable investing is to address these planetary issues, then how then are we going to address them if we're starting to exclude all the ones that are supposedly dirty or not green and so on? It doesn't work that way. We have to be inclusive, and the way we uh, um, position and approach our investments is key to this integration. Lastly, we must have a set of principles in order for us to have values and ethics and a way we guide our decisions. And then we go bang on straight, get dirty, roll up our sleeves, and say, what then do our processes need? And for us at Phillip, we decided to backbone this by research, with research. Our research process is foundational to how we feed our risk management side of things. How do we check our portfolios? How do we check our individual entities? How then does that feed into our investment strategies as well? So that's how we approached it, how we started. We didn't go grabbing whatever was ready made. We sat down and said, look, there needs to be some hard work in play to make sure that we were able to do some sense making, and after which make sure that we built something that we believed in, that mattered to us and our clients, as well as our people, but also then what matters to the investments and the businesses that we invest in. So with this in place, ESG integration it means that much to us. To the investor with that kind of backbone, right, and that kind of framework that gets propped up by these three processes that I just mentioned: research, risk management, investment. It provides the investor the assurance that when you talk about ESG investing and sustainable investing, to the investor, it's about three things: preparation, profitability, and punch. I'll elaborate. In preparation, when you do have our ESG research as the backbone, right, it's a lot of the times complementary to what near-term or short-term analysis does for the stocks and so on. But it's preparation more than prediction that we're doing, because of the fact that we've spent time and effort in this process that's now, partly automated, where we advance capital flow, right? Because we know and we identify entities, whether they be countries or in terms of issuers or companies, in terms of stocks and bonds. And we also advance the risk-adjusted return simply by purposefully allocating our asset to durable and well-positioned entities, right? Through this enhanced analysis. So we're not throwing away our fundamental analysis. We're not throwing away the technicals that we rely on, but ESG research tops it up. And over and above this, we all know about data challenges here, reporting discrepancies and whatnot in that area. We do have also an engagement process, right, where we have active engagement to fill the data gaps, to verify certain things, and to make sure that our rating tells the story we want to tell. Okay. On profitability, we focus not just on price, right, but actually on the business. It amplifies our investment opportunities as well. So, for example, when we go into REITs or we go into banks or even so-called dirty companies in oil and gas, are they part of the solution? And if they are, our research flashes this out, and that's what I mean by investment opportunity. So we enhance the value of not just our shareholders, our investors, but we also identify the value of the company as a whole, right? Not just on the short-term ticks. So we assess this business with also two things: global standards. We use global reporting standards like SASB; those are auditing standards. We also use science-backed factors, science-backed ESG factors that are material to financial stability, as well as environmental sustainability. And I'm going to talk about that. I'll elaborate a little bit more on that. But I guess a good clarification for ESG is this: we're not talking about trees and corals and mangroves and birds. We're talking about what happens when we take those away to the businesses that we invest in that are dependent on them. That's what ESG is about. Lastly, I talked about punch, and punch, what I mean is impact, right? It's more on punch because we're doing our due diligence and research. It's about punch, not posturing. It's about using the research to find out impacts so that we can accelerate those positive impacts and outcomes that we after. And we approve these entities, right, by way of our research. These entities that drive necessary change, they're part of the solution, like I mentioned before, but most of all that prioritize ESG, prioritize governance over sustainable environmental, social, and corporate outcomes. These are the entities that we want to invest in for the long haul. Over to you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Stephen. So we all know that in line with the global sustainability goals, there have been a lot ESG efforts are being carried out by the public sector and private sector, and including Phillip Capital Management as well, whereby I am happy that I think investors will be happy to learn that Phillip Capital Management actually put in a lot of effort in their research, looking for sustainable companies, ESG compliant companies for the investment purpose. So moving on, Mr. Stephen, as ESG has evolved over time, what are the trends or emerging issues that are likely to shape the future of sustainable investing?
Well, there are quite a few. Like I mentioned before, so there's no decoupling from the mega trends that I mentioned earlier. Those are definitely things to watch because mega trends don't stand alone. They obviously have trickle-down effects on the countries and the companies within sectors that those trends are directly impacting or impacted by, right? So climate change being one. If there are carbon-intensive companies that are very emissive, very pollutive, obviously then that's where we want to make sure that our measurement kicks in, right? So we do look at double materiality in our research, by the way. And that means that we not just look at companies that are able to manage the external risk on their operations, but what's their operational risk and impact on their environment that they operate in. And when we talk about environment in this context, it's not just about the natural environment, we're talking about social environment as well. Yeah. But trends that we are watching closer, obviously there are quite a few, but I'll touch on a few. Decarbonization is one of them I talked about, where it has quite a lot of space that needs to be monitored just because it is very industry specific. So we do break down the sectors, right? Whether it's energy, food, agriculture, building, and transport. And within each industry, how then, right? In maritime decarbonization, for example, we're watching very closely, not just on the shipping industry, but everything down the line, upstream and downstream, right? We're looking at port development. We're looking at port-to-port agreements within governments. How does that uh, um, have implications on the businesses? Where then are new businesses going to pop in? If decarbonization is happening at the maritime level, are we looking at new fuels and their manufacturers? Are we looking also at the guys looking at solutions in terms of carbon capture at sea? Whether that's ready or not is another matter, but these are trends that we watch. What I think is going to come about, and we do obviously look at the viability of carbon markets, right? Even though that's offsets are the lowest of the priorities right now, decarbonization being the real decarbonization being the priority. We're looking at nature protection as a key trend coming into the picture, and when it does mature, it will come in hard and fast because of what we talked about earlier, right? When we talk about addressing issues, are we so focused on addressing one issue that we forget the other, or we achieve goals at the expense of another? Now, when we talk about natural capital and the dependencies of companies that we invest in on it, it's far-reaching, right? Water, for example, is a critical asset to every single company, directly or indirectly. So how then do we look at our investment in the long term to make sure that we identify these risks, first of all, but we identify the spaces we need, not just in investments, but how do we contribute in terms of contributing to the finance or the funding gap. When we talk about biodiversity and being from Malaysia and me from Singapore, we love to eat, but I'm a foodie, right? When we talk about entire populations succumbing to a very, very apocalyptic scene when climate change does hit, did we ever think about things as we approach there? We talk about final survivability, but we talk about food. Our dietary, not just needs or wants, it's what's available. It's what's going to be available in the next 10, 20, or 30 years. So these are matters close to our heart. These are matters close to our investments, right? How then do we contribute to the bigger picture, to that to that green transition? Um, there's a $700 billion funding gap annually, right? Annually, in biodiversity need. So we're looking very closely at how our investments can contribute to this, but also how we can package different ways of financing conservation as well as a sustainable economic activity. I think this blending is important, and it's not just for the finance side or the bank side to get involved in. I think we've got a lot of room in Phillip Capital with all the diversity of businesses that we have within the group to get our hands dirty in this space as well. I think it provides options for our clients to. So this multidisciplinary approach that I talked about in earlier has to be applied to nature protection and natural capital protection, right? We can also contribute in terms of having uh, um, ourselves in the liquidity game, right? We can provide not just in the carbon markets, but as water becomes commoditized, as agriculture and certain parts of a forest become commoditized, how then can we contribute to the market mechanism? Yeah.
All right, thank you, Mr. Stephen. So we hear you on the emerging trends in the decarbonization, in the carbon market, environmental and social side of things. And you also mentioned that there are billions of funding gaps yet to be closed. And that will also mean pockets of investment opportunities within the ESG space that could spill over to certain winners, certain industry, or even certain companies. So probably this question I think is also very relevant that how can ESG consideration be balanced with other investment priorities such as risk management and financial returns? We all know that in the shorter term, when we are investing into ESG related goals, it will commit some form of capital as well as effort as well. So in the shorter term, that may also bring some negative impact to the financial performance. What's your thought on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's something that we want to clarify and change, right? At the end of the day, the approach that I mentioned earlier to you, we have this inclusionary approach where we want to partner and our investee companies instead of punish them. So we don't do an exclusion or a negative screen, right? And that having said, we can't have business going on as usual either. So that's why I mentioned that our ESG framework is anchored on research to make sure that our business doesn't carry on as usual when we do apply our inclusionary approach. Now, if you do that, then there's really no balancing that we need to do because of the fact that when you talk about ESG, right, and the ESG issues, they have everything to do about financially material factors. We don't, first and foremost, when we apply things to ourselves as Phillip Capital, there's no taking finance out of a financial institution. Number two, when we talk about ESG issues, we are talking about financially material issues, right? That may have escaped our usual ways of analyzing and assessing an investment. These are risks that impact the financial bottom line, externally and internally. And earlier I mentioned to you that we do take into account the double materiality risk. And this is where it's important that we assess companies that are not just doing their due diligence in, identifying and managing external risks, but looking inwardly and saying, I have mitigative measures on my externalities because of the fact that I don't want to be a cause of that, my own risk, right? Many companies that we see today understand planetary risk to the company and also their operational impact, outwardly, the externalities. And also they understand their influence on communities, right? So if you take it into the rural areas or to a lot of the developing countries, if they pollute the river that is feeding, urbanized areas that their employees and their staff come from, right? It's kind of a vicious circle going on. So really, honestly, that's what we measure. When we take it to how we use the research, there are certain key metrics, as in measurements, that we look for. A logistics company, for example, we look at how they're conserving energy, how they're having water efficiency processes put in place, how they're greening their buildings, for example. When we look at other financial institutions and banks, we're looking at specifically their loan books. How are they changing in terms of percentage and making it accessible? So the social and the equitable access to this fund is something that's also important to us. Yeah. A lot of times also the narrative needs to change this way where if we still think about ESG as doing good and doing well, I think we need to crush it and throw it away. I think there's a very purposeful approach to ESG measurement and sustainable investing now, but also a very practical one. Do we actually put forth a real world outcome that matters to our investment? Or do we just want to say, look, this is a green portfolio because of a score, and then call it an ESG fund and kick it out the window and hopefully somebody will invest in that? No, right? So I think you talk about the issues in water, for example. 1 in 5 companies, right, report significant water risk in their supply chain. It affects billions in assets. And companies that a survey found, right, companies that engage suppliers are 7 times more likely to identify and manage those water risks effectively. So like I mentioned before, water is a critical component, right, for every single industry, direct or indirect. And how then do we measure this? How then do we identify these companies that have a good position on managing these upcoming challenges and changes?
Okay, thank you, Stefan. So we have actually gained a lot good info and good insights from Mr. Stefan on how we can actually strike a balance between ESG priorities as well as financial returns, especially. And ultimately, I think the most optimum outcome is to uh, set a priority, right? Whether it's ESG, whether it's putting aside some of the short-term financial losses in return for greater ESG gains in the future. I think that's could make sense in the longer term. So before we end the session today, probably Stefan, would you like to share some of the ESG products, ESG related products launched by Phillip Capital Management in Singapore?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. And again, let me reiterate that there's no compromise on financial performance if your ESG framework allows for it. Like as I explained earlier, this is critical to investors coming in with the knowledge that first and foremost, ESG flashes out the ESG related financially material risks. And if we choose entities that manage that risk, that's a big level up already. And this is what we do for one of our retail funds, one of our ESG retail funds called the Sustainable Reserve Fund. It's a short duration bond fund, but our inclusionary approach then allows us to assess the issuer, not so much the issuance. Obviously, then it opens up loan books and projects where green bonds and sustainable linked bonds and loans come into the picture. Um, but it's a fund that is centered on making sure we do what you and I just discussed just now. How then do we make sure that in a very traditional fund, we're able to say, yes, these are the issuers that are contributing to a green economy, and therefore it makes sense for us to buy their papers, which put together in the right way and with the right weightage, actually performs for investments, and hand to heart know that these are also banks and entities that are contributing and being part of the solution. So we use actually a few methodologies to make sure that our verification process is done correctly, and obviously it's MAS compliant. But it gives a very clean picture to the investors on what then they're buying, what then they can expect out of their financial performance of a fund like this, right? Where there's quite a lot of benefits to a short duration bond fund. But in terms of ESG, I think what's notable is this: we use a carbon risk rating, so we're quite sure that these issuers that put in some effort and a year-on-year performance in terms of how they want to decarbonize, be it a portfolio, be it their loan books, or um, the physical assets. We also have an overarching ESG corporate rating, where all the other factors where I mentioned, right, you cannot be too myopic in just doing uh, climate-related actions with a compromise to natural resources or pollution, for example. Um, internally, as you now know, we've got capability of verification and validation of our funds and our investments in general. Internally, we do a very thorough check. We have 3 research objectives here. We, as I shared earlier, we assess issues in terms of how they're managing ESG risk. We also assess them in terms of how they're mitigating the externalities, the negative externalities. Lastly, we do a additional check in terms of measuring positive change. How then are these banks committing to certain targets? Are they greening their loan books on a year-on-year basis at a certain rate? Right. So these are some things that we assess, and this is some things that we bundle together into this retail ESG fund.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Stefan. I think it's a very interesting product in the sense that we are investing not only in bonds but in green bonds, whereby the companies are viewed as more greener, and they are also taking their considerable efforts in order to so-called meet the sustainable goals. So all in, ESG is becoming more and more important, that now everyone, including institutions, corporates, or even retail investors, are also putting emphasis on ESG, and with the hope that we as an individual can contribute to a better future. So we would like to express our sincere gratitude to Mr. Stephen for for attending this session with us, and we have gained a lot interesting insights on the ESG developments around the world as well. Thank you so much, Mr. Stephen. We hope that our audience can have a lot of opportunities to hear more on ESG from both Phillip Capital Malaysia and Singapore perspective. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, we look forward to having more solutions and available products in Malaysia as well.
I'm sure that our audience have gained a lot insightful information from Mr. Stephen earlier on the ESG developments around the world, including in Singapore as well. In line with the nation's goal towards sustainability, Phillip Capital Management, PCM, in Malaysia has integrated ESG factors that we attest as material and relevant for our company's financial performance and long-term sustainability into our decision-making process. These include, but not limited to, ESG ratings by established index, environmental considerations, climate change, natural resources preservation, pollution and waste, social consideration like health and safety, community engagement, employee relations, and finally, governance consideration, which include board independence, transparency, and disclosure, as well as shareholder rights. With that, PCM introduced a discretionary portfolio that invests in stocks with high ESG ratings from the FTSE4Good Bursa Malaysia and FTSE4Good Bursa Malaysia Sharia indexes, namely PMAT and PMA ESG. In April 2022, there are both conventional and Sharia options available. PMAT and PMA ESG is suitable for investors who want to optimize the risk-adjusted return by constructing a diverse, sustainable portfolio of ESG companies. For PMAT, the initial investment amount is 10,000 ringgit and the subsequent investment amount is 5,000 ringgit. And for PMA, the initial investment amount is 50,000 ringgit and the subsequent investment amount is 10,000 ringgit. I'd like to reiterate that both conventional and Sharia options are available. Here is our top 10 holdings in ESG conventional mandate, which covers stocks from different sectors such as construction, property, telco, tech, energy, and consumer discretionary. Construction is a beneficiary of National Energy Transition Roadmap, NETR. Property and telco see benefits from rising demand for data center. Tech is strategically aligned with emerging ESG investment trends such as EV, semiconductors, AI, biotech, and other related themes. And finally, there are also many quality companies within the energy and consumer discretionary space. Thanks to our commitment to seizing the diverse opportunity in the ESG space, we managed to record a positive performance of 21.63% year to date for our conventional ESG mandate, outperforming the benchmark of FTSE4Good index of 14.35%. While the past performance is not a guarantee of future returns, we remain dedicated in identifying quality ESG stocks to be included in our portfolio. Meanwhile, for our Sharia ESG mandate, here's our top 10 holdings. Performance-wise, we recorded a positive performance of 15.05% year to date for our Sharia ESG mandate, in line with the benchmark of FTSE4Good Sharia index of 15.01%. Again, while the past performance is not a guarantee of future returns, we remain dedicated in identifying quality ESG stocks to be included in our portfolio. On top of the ESG mandate, we all know the effectiveness of dividend investing as a strategy during times of market weakness and uncertainty, and the benefits of dividend investing should not be ignored by the investors. Recognizing the increasing significance of ESG factors in investment decisions, we have introduced the Dividend Enhanced ESG Mandate in April 2024, which integrates quantitative investment methods inspired by our dividend enhanced strategy. This methodology involves universe selection, filtering, construction, and rebalancing. And building upon our investment strategy, we have integrated an ESG filter mandating that selected stocks meet a minimum ESG ratings of 3 stars from the FTSE4Good Bursa Malaysia Index. Why dividend enhanced ESG? First and foremost, we believe that selecting top market cap stocks could minimize the unsystematic risk and liquidity risk during our investment journey. It's a disciplined and systematic approach which follows a rigorous back-tested strategy. Consistent results can be obtained when there's limited human intervention, and we remain committed in generating returns from capital appreciation and income distribution from selecting advantageous dividend-yielding stocks. Finally, there's a potential to generate superior financial returns while mitigating various risks associated with environmental, social, and governance factors. Here's a list of our holdings in dividend enhanced ESG mandate. And this is a list for our dividend enhanced ESG Sharia mandate. Note that a minimum ESG rating of 3 stars from the FTSE4Good Bursa Malaysia Index is required in order to be selected in our portfolio. We remain dedicated to investing in ESG stocks because we believe that they tend to enjoy stronger valuation and profitability attributed to their adept risk management, innovative operational efficiencies, alignment with regulatory compliance, and enhanced reputation and brand equity, fostering high shareholder return and better profitability. We will consistently assess our holdings and rebalance the portfolio as necessary to align with the prevailing market conditions. That's all for today. Stay tuned for our next Phillip Mastermind. This update is brought to you by Phillip Capital, your partner in finance. Thank you.